They say blood is thicker than water, but they never tell you that sometimes it also stains. The last time my sister and I spoke was 15 years ago on a Sunday, when the sky couldn't decide if it wanted to storm or bless us. We stood on opposite sides of Mama's porch, two grown women holding a silence that started in childhood and kept growing teeth. She had her city shoes on, the kind that don't know dirt, and I still wore the same garden clogs Mama left by the door. She said, "We're nothing alike, you and me." I said, "That's the first true thing you've ever said." She left before the rain started, and I never saw her again. Until the phone call. It was a Wednesday, years later. I was watering the peonies that never did listen to weather when the hospital number blinked on my phone. The nurse's voice was kind in that careful way people use when they're about to hand you something fragile. "Miss Ruth Leland, I'm calling about your sister, Evelyn. She's been admitted with advanced heart failure. She's on the transplant list." I didn't say anything for a long moment. The word heart kept echoing, like it had found a hallway. Then the nurse said something that caught the air still. "We're reaching out to immediate family for compatibility testing." I laughed. Soft, bitter, like a cough with manners. "Ma'am, my sister and I were never compatible." That night, I couldn't sleep. The house was quiet, except for the old clock that still clicked like it was keeping time for a better family. I made tea I didn't drink. I sat by the window, watching the rain that had missed our argument all those years ago finally arrive. Late, but thorough. If you're listening, tell me where you are tonight. Maybe the rain sounds the same where you live. I tried to remember the last time I'd called her. Maybe the year Mama died. Maybe not even then. I still had a box of letters from her, unopened, tied with kitchen string, sitting behind the flour canister. She'd kept writing after the fight. I just stopped answering. Pride is heavy when you carry it long enough. It builds muscle in all the wrong places. The next morning, I drove into town for groceries and came back with a hospital form instead. The nurse had sent me an email with the testing instructions. Simple, clinical. A cheek swab, a few vials of blood. Funny, isn't it? How they make something sacred sound like a transaction. Like returning a library book. I held the kit in my hand and thought of the things Evelyn and I used to share. We shared a bed when storms were bad, a secret language of whistles across the yard, and one pink ribbon that we fought over until Mama cut it in two. We stopped sharing after Daddy left, after the world told her she was prettier, smarter, destined for somewhere better. I stayed. She ran. Maybe that was the first transplant, her heart into motion, mine into waiting. I didn't send the kit right away. It sat on the counter for 3 days, like a question I didn't want to answer. I tried to talk myself out of it. "She wouldn't do the same for you," I told my reflection. My reflection agreed. But the mirror isn't loyal. It'll nod to anyone who stands in front of it long enough. On the fourth night, I dreamed of Mama's voice. She said, "Ruth, don't measure love by what it costs you." When I woke up, the decision was already made. If you've ever done the right thing for the wrong person, leave a rose below. That's how we know we're still capable of grace. At the clinic, the nurse drew my blood while I stared at the poster about the miracle of matching. It showed two hearts drawn together with a red ribbon. Cute, I thought, but real ribbons fray. When she was done, I asked what happened next. She said, "We'll let you know in a few days. These things take time." Time. That was the one thing Evelyn always seemed to have less of, even when she was young. She rushed through everything: school, love, her vows. She married a man who thought laughter was a luxury, then left him before he could realize she'd been serious about living. Meanwhile, I stayed with the soil and the same slow seasons. Mama used to say, "Roots plants roots. Evelyn grows wings." Turns out both get caught in storms eventually. 3 days later, my phone rang again. "Miss Leland," the nurse said, "you're a perfect match." The words felt heavy, like I'd swallowed a coin. I asked her to repeat it, slower. "Your tissue markers align. You could be the donor." I hung up before she started explaining what that meant. I didn't need diagrams to understand irony. That night, I sat on the porch with my tea, staring at the stars. The wind sounded like it was trying to remember a song Mama used to hum. I whispered to the dark, "Perfect match, huh? Took us 50 years to agree on something." For 2 days, I said nothing to anyone. The world went on politely unaware. The postman waved. The neighbor's dog barked at its own shadow. I baked bread I didn't eat and reread her old letters. The first few were full of gossip and apology. Then they turned careful. The last one was short, just one line. "I wish you'd answer before it's too late." I folded it and placed it in my coat pocket. Some words are easier to carry than forgive. By Friday, I'd packed a small bag. Just what you bring when you don't know if you're leaving or returning. On the counter, I left a note for Ellen, my neighbor. "If you see the porch light on past midnight, it means I'm fine." She'd understand. Driving to the hospital felt like crossing into a story I didn't remember agreeing to tell. The roads were quiet, lined with pines that bowed like they knew something I didn't. I watched the miles count down on the dashboard, and each number felt like a heartbeat I was borrowing. When I reached the parking lot, I sat for a long while with the engine running. I could see the building, clean, square, humming with fluorescent certainty. Somewhere inside was my sister, and somewhere inside me was the part of her she'd need to keep going. I turned the key, the engine quieted, and for a moment, I heard my own pulse, soft, steady, deciding. If you're still here, stay with me. I'll tell you what happened when we met again after all those years of silence, and how the body sometimes forgives before the heart does.
Hospitals don't smell like healing. They smell like waiting, bleach, and breath, fear wrapped in air conditioning. The lobby was too bright when I walked in, everything white and polished, like they wanted to hide that people broke here. I stood for a moment at the reception desk while the volunteer, a boy who looked younger than my shoes, asked, "Relation to patient?" I said, "Blood." He nodded like that explained everything. He didn't know it didn't. They put me in a room marked family consultation. You know what that means. It means they're about to tell you something that will live under your ribs forever. The doctor walked in, gentle eyes, tired voice. He said Evelyn was stable, but fragile. Heart muscle failing, transplant needed within weeks. Then he asked if I'd been informed of my compatibility. I nodded. He smiled in that rehearsed way that means both congratulations and condolences. He started to talk about procedures, consent forms, survival odds. I stopped listening. All I could hear was the word match, looping, quiet, relentless. If you're still with me, tell me where you're listening from. I like knowing someone's heartbeat is keeping time with mine. I saw her that afternoon. She looked small, smaller than I remembered. Her hair was thinner, her skin pale as moonlight. Machines breathed around her like polite witnesses. For a long while, I just stood there. The nurse said, "She might not wake up right now." I said, "That's fine. I've waited longer for less." Her hand lay on top of the sheet, a stranger's hand, all bones and wires. I touched it gently, the way you test the temperature of forgiveness. Her eyelids fluttered but didn't open. There, in that sterile light, I noticed something absurd. Her nails were still painted red. Of course they were. Evelyn had never met a crisis she couldn't accessorize. Even dying, she looked ready for a party. I wanted to be angry, but all I felt was tired. I sat in the visitor's chair and stared at the monitor blinking in rhythm, steady, then shallow, then steady again. Each beep sounded like a secret we hadn't finished telling. I whispered, "You always said we were nothing alike. Turns out, our hearts disagree." If you've ever talked to someone who couldn't answer back, tell me below. Sometimes silence tells the truth better than words. They moved her to a different ward that night. The nurse told me she'd asked for me when she woke briefly. "Are you sure?" I asked. She nodded, called you by name, said, "Tell Ruth not to leave yet." I didn't know what yet meant, but I stayed. I booked a cheap motel 2 blocks away, the kind with thin towels and a louder clock. Each night I'd sit by the window, look up at the hospital glow, and think about the things we lost by talking too little and meaning too late. I started writing again. Not letters, just notes on scrap paper. What if forgiveness is the body remembering how to breathe? What if love is the one organ that can't reject its donor?
On the 3rd day, I visited when the sun was low enough to soften everything. She was awake this time. When our eyes met, it didn't feel like reunion. It felt like a storm deciding whether to turn back. Her voice was weak but sharp. "I thought you'd hate me too much to come." "I did," I said, "for a while." She tried to smile. "Still blunt, huh?" "Still breathing," I said. There was a pause that lasted a decade. Then she whispered, "Why are you here, Ruth?" I wanted to say, because I couldn't not be, but what came out was, because they said you needed something I have. Her eyes glistened, not with tears, but with disbelief. "You mean?" "Yes," I said. She shook her head. "You'd give me your heart?" "No," I told her softly, "just a piece of it." She laughed, a dry, broken sound that turned into coughing. The nurse rushed in. I stepped back, watching the small, fierce woman who used to win every argument because she could cry prettier than I could. Now all her power was in needing. That night, I sat outside the hospital cafeteria with a vending machine sandwich. The hallway was full of echoes, gurneys rolling, pages turning, someone crying down the hall. I thought about the last meal we ever shared before the fight, Mama's fried chicken, Sunday heat, iced tea too sweet to swallow. Evelyn had said, "I'm not staying here forever." I'd said, "Then don't expect forever when you leave." Now here we were, orbiting the same grief again, both out of time. If you're still listening, press like, just so I know you're here. It's strange how company can exist in silence. The doctor called me into his office the next morning. He spoke carefully, like words might bruise. "Your sister's condition is worsening. There's a possibility if you wanted to donate part of your heart tissue, we could attempt a bridge procedure. It's experimental, but it might buy her time." Buy her time. That's what science calls mercy when it's tired. I said, "Would it hurt?" He said, "Yes, but not forever." I nodded. "Then it's worth it." He looked at me strangely, like he'd never seen someone volunteer for heartbreak. The surgery wasn't the kind people make movies about. No bright lights or dramatic music, just forms, gloves, and faith. They took a small graft, enough to help her heart keep rhythm until a full donor could be found. A bridge, they called it. Between sisters, it was more than a bridge. It was a translation. When I woke, the nurse said it went well. I asked about Evelyn. "She's resting. Her heart is stronger now." I smiled. "It's stubborn," I said. "She gets that from me." Later that night, they let me see her. She was sleeping peacefully, color back in her cheeks. I sat in the chair beside her bed and listened to the steady sound of two lives learning to share the same rhythm. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to speak. Silence wasn't punishment anymore. It was prayer. If you've ever forgiven someone who never asked, leave a small flower below. Sometimes grace doesn't wait for an invitation. Before I left, I whispered something to her. It wasn't poetic. It wasn't planned. I just said, "Don't waste it this time." She stirred, murmured, "I won't." And maybe she meant the heart, or maybe she meant us. When I got back to my motel, I looked at my reflection in the mirror. There was a small bandage just below my collarbone, a square of gauze holding the story in place. I touched it and felt the faint echo of her heartbeat somewhere far but connected. And for the first time, I realized this wasn't just donation, it was communion. A kind of shared resurrection neither of us earned, but both needed. If you're still here, stay close. Next time, I'll tell you what happened when she woke fully, when she learned that the bridge between us was real, and how love found a way to beat twice in one body.
When people say she gave her heart, they never mean it literally. But sometimes life has a dark sense of humor and the metaphor starts cutting flesh. It was 2 weeks later when the doctor called. I was back home, feeding the hens, pretending everything was ordinary again. He said they'd found a full donor heart for Evelyn, but she wouldn't survive surgery without the preliminary graft I'd given holding steady. He told me, "The bridge worked. It bought her time." Then his tone shifted. "We'll need you here during the transplant for observation. Your own heart's been compensating, so we have to monitor both of you." Both of us. Even after all these years of distance, there we were, the sentence that tied our names together again. The morning I drove back, the air was foggy, like the world hadn't decided to wake up yet. Every mile felt like the heartbeat of something alive between us, soft, stubborn, unfinished.
When I reached the hospital, they led me through a side door, as if what we were about to do required quiet. The nurse who prepped me had a kind face and trembling hands. She said, "You must love your sister very much." I almost told her the truth, that love isn't always the reason people save each other. Sometimes it's regret with better manners. If you're still listening, tell me, would you give your heart to someone who broke it first? I ask because I did, and I don't know if that makes me foolish or free. They let me see her before the operation. She was awake this time, pale, scared, softer somehow. The red nail polish had chipped away to ghosts of color. Her eyes found mine like she'd been rehearsing that moment in her sleep. She said, "I heard what you did. I didn't do it for thanks." She said, "I know. That's why it hurts worse." I sat by the bed. "Do you remember that summer Mama sent us to the river and told us not to come back till we stopped fighting?" She smiled weakly. "We came back sunburned and still arguing." "Yeah," I said, "but we brought her wildflowers because we thought she'd forgotten us." "She never did. Neither did you." For the first time since I could remember, her voice didn't sound like competition. It sounded like family. The doctor came in with forms and a clipboard full of reassurance. He said things like, "excellent timing and successful compatibility," but all I heard was the quiet under his words, the unspoken miracle that one sister's body had carried the other this far. He asked if we wanted a moment alone. Evelyn looked at me and said, "Stay." So I did. They wheeled her toward the operating room. Her fingers brushed mine as she passed, the lightest touch, but it felt like a signature. For the first time in years, our skin didn't flinch from memory. I sat in the waiting room with a paper cup of bad coffee and an old magazine. Time stopped pretending to move forward. Every announcement over the intercom sounded like the start of an ending. There's something strange about hospitals, how you can feel utterly alone while surrounded by proof of life. The sound of machines, footsteps, heart monitors, all of them chanting, "Stay, stay, stay." I closed my eyes and tried to remember her laughter from when we were girls, before the words "you and me" became "you or me." We used to make daisy crowns, trade secrets, race to see who could make Mama smile first. She always won. I always let her. If you've ever lost someone while they were still alive, leave a daisy below. Some of us are experts in survival before the crisis even comes. Hours passed. Then the doctor appeared, the same gentle eyes, but now lined with fatigue. "It went well," he said. "The new heart's beating strong. She's in recovery." I exhaled like the air had been holding me hostage. He smiled. "You might want to rest too. Your vitals dropped during the procedure. Sympathy response." I laughed softly. Typical. Even my pulse can't mind its own business. That night, I stayed in the hospital bed down the hall, hooked to monitors that blinked in time with hers. The nurse said, "Your hearts are synced for now. It's normal." I thought of all the years we'd spent out of rhythm, and now, of all places, we'd found tempo in a building full of borrowed hope. I whispered into the dark, "Can you hear me, Evie? You better take good care of what's mine." Somewhere in the distance, a monitor beat faster, just once, as if answering. Morning came slow, dripping through the blinds like mercy that took its time. When I walked into her room, she was awake, pale but present, her eyes full of something I'd never seen in her before. humility. She looked at me and said, "It's strange. It beats different." I smiled. "It's got manners now." She laughed, the soft kind that hurts your stitches. Then she whispered, "Does it feel strange for you too?" I placed my hand over my chest and said, "It feels quieter." We sat there in silence, two women bound by the same rhythm, both hearing the same song for the first time. If you're still listening, tell me where you're from. I like imagining this heartbeat reaching across places, reminding strangers we're more connected than we know. They kept us under observation for a week. Every day she got stronger, and every day I felt lighter, like I was shedding the years of resentment we'd carried between us. She'd ask for stories, ones I never thought she remembered. She'd say, "Tell me about the river." Or, "What did Mama cook that night Daddy came home drunk?" Sometimes I'd tell her. Sometimes I'd just say, "It's in the blood, Evie. You already know." One afternoon, she reached over, touched my wrist gently, and said, "I didn't think I deserved this." I said, "You didn't." Then I smiled, "But you needed it. And maybe that's close enough." The day they released her, she looked at me like she wanted to say something permanent but didn't know how. So I spoke first. "Don't call this forgiveness. Call it circulation. It just needed to move again." She nodded, tears slipping down like they were overdue. We walked out together, two women, one heartbeat, a shared silence that finally sounded like peace. If you're ever carrying someone's pain until it became your own, leave me a heart below. That's how I know you understand what I mean when I say, love is surgery that doesn't always use knives. That night, back in my own bed, I placed my hand on my chest and listened. One beat, steady. Somewhere in another house across town, another beat answered. It's funny. I used to think forgiveness was a word. Now I know it's a rhythm. If you're still here, stay close. I'll tell you what came after, when she learned to live with my heart and I learned to let her.
The world after forgiveness feels strange, quieter maybe, lighter in places that used to ache. When I came home, the house didn't look different, but it felt roomier, like the air had been holding its breath from me and finally exhaled. The porch light hummed. The clock on the mantel ticked like it used to, steady, patient, no longer mocking. And for the first time in decades, I didn't feel alone in the sound. I could feel her heartbeat inside mine, a rhythm too stubborn to belong to just one woman anymore. For weeks, I sent her little things, jars of honey, old photos, a crocheted blanket Mama made, and every few days I'd get a letter back. Her handwriting looked different now, slower, steadier, like she was afraid to break the pen. She wrote about the way mornings tasted sweeter, how she cried in church for the first time in years, how sometimes she caught herself touching her chest as if to make sure it was still real. Her first letter began with, "It beats strong, Ruth. Sometimes too strong. Maybe it's trying to tell me something you never did." I smiled when I read that, because maybe it was. One afternoon, she came to visit. It had been 3 months since the surgery. She looked better, fragile but glowing, as if light had found its way under her skin. She stood at the gate nervous, holding a pie. She said, "Apple, the way Mama used to make it." We sat on the porch swing while the cicadas tuned the air. The pie went untouched. Some hungers aren't for food. She looked at me and said,
I read something of yours. I frowned. What do you mean? The journal they found in your bag before surgery. Field notes from the afterlife? I chuckled. You weren't supposed to. I know, she said softly, but I had to hear you, really hear you. There was a long silence. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out a folded page, one of mine. She read aloud, voice trembling. I forgive her, not because she asked, but because I'm tired of carrying both hearts alone. Her voice cracked. You did forgive me. I had to. You were taking the better half with you. If you're listening, tell me where you are tonight. Because somewhere, someone's waiting to hear they're forgiven too. The world after forgiveness feels strange. Quieter, maybe. Lighter in places that used to ache. When I came home, the house didn't look different, but it felt roomier. Like the air had been holding its breath from me and finally exhaled. The porch light hummed. The clock on the mantel ticked like it used to, steady, patient, no longer mocking. And for the first time in decades, I didn't feel alone in the sound. I could feel her heartbeat inside mine, a rhythm too stubborn to belong to just one woman anymore. For weeks, I sent her little things, jars of honey, old photos, a crocheted blanket Mama made, and every few days I'd get a letter back. Her handwriting looked different now, slower, steadier, like she was afraid to break the pen. She wrote about the way mornings tasted sweeter, how she cried in church for the first time in years, how sometimes she caught herself touching her chest as if to make sure it was still real. Her first letter began with, "It beats strong, Ruth. Sometimes too strong. Maybe it's trying to tell me something you never did." I smiled when I read that, because maybe it was. One afternoon, she came to visit. It had been 3 months since the surgery. She looked better, fragile but glowing, as if light had found its way under her skin. She stood at the gate nervous, holding a pie. She said, "Apple, the way Mama used to make it." We sat on the porch swing while the cicadas tuned the air. The pie went untouched. Some hungers aren't for food. She looked at me and said, "I read something of yours." I frowned. What do you mean? The journal they found in your bag before surgery. Field notes from the afterlife? I chuckled. You weren't supposed to. I know, she said softly, but I had to hear you, really hear you. There was a long silence. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out a folded page, one of mine. She read aloud, voice trembling. I forgive her, not because she asked, but because I'm tired of carrying both hearts alone. Her voice cracked. You did forgive me. I had to. You were taking the better half with you. If you're listening, tell me where you are tonight. Because somewhere, someone's waiting to hear they're forgiven too. We talked for hours about Mama, about the porch swing, about the years we'd wasted being right instead of being close. She told me she still dreamt of the river. I always see you on the other side, she said. I keep trying to cross. Maybe you already did, I said. She smiled. Then I guess I finally caught up. Before she left, she placed her hand over my heart, and I did the same over hers. We stood like that, mirror images, two stubborn women with one steady rhythm. No music, no apology, just breath and truth. A few months later, I got a call from her doctor, just to check in. He said her recovery was exceptional, almost poetic. I laughed. That's just how our family bleeds. I hung up and sat by the window, watching the sky melt into late afternoon gold. Somewhere out there, she was probably doing the same thing, maybe hearing the same song of wind through trees. I thought of Mama again, her voice like soft linen. She used to say, "Girls, one day you'll realize the heart only has two jobs, to hurt and to heal, but never at the same time." I finally understood what she meant. A few weeks later, Evelyn came again, this time with her daughter, a girl I'd only seen in pictures. She ran up to me and said, "Aunt Ruth, Mom says part of you lives in her." I smiled. "That's true, sweetheart." She placed her ear against her mother's chest. "Then I can hear you too." And for a moment, it felt like the world had folded back into itself. No more missing pieces, no more noise, just pulse. If you've ever felt your family inside your own heartbeat, leave a heart below. That's how we stay remembered. That night after they left, I found a small box on my porch. Inside was a silver locket engraved with one word, ours. When I opened it, there were two tiny heartbeats etched side by side, imperfect, uneven, but beautiful. It wasn't jewelry. It was proof. I put it on and sat by the window. The moon hung low, pale and forgiving. I could almost hear Evelyn breathing in sync with me, miles away. Sometimes people ask me if I regret giving her that second chance. I tell them no, because in giving it, I found mine too. Turns out, the only real difference between us was timing. She broke first. I healed first. Now we both just are. If you're still here, take a deep breath with me. Feel your own heartbeat, that small, stubborn drum that refuses to quit. Every one of us carries someone else's rhythm inside. Sometimes we just forget to listen for it. And if this story found you tonight, maybe it's your sign to forgive someone before time asks for payment. Because grace, like a heart, doesn't stay still forever. Because here, on True Life Stories, we don't just tell stories. We remember them. We breathe them back to life, one heartbeat at a time.